Sometimes people stop looking you in the eye before they even say goodbye. She noticed that first. The silence that came before the silence. Every morning she made tea for two. Even when the second cup went cold, she still folded the blanket the way he used to, smoothing the edges like it mattered. They said it was just easier that way. To forget, to move on. But something inside her never did. Because if she were really cursed, why did it still hurt like love? Chapter 1. The curse she carried. The frost came early that year. It clung to the tall grass in thin white threads and turned every breath into a cloud. The sun hadn't risen fully when they found her, curled up in the frost fields like something the night forgot. Barefoot, still. Her eyes were open but unfocused, like she was looking through the world instead of at it. Elira didn't move when they spoke her name. She didn't flinch when the healer brushed the frost from her hair. She just blinked, slowly, like it took effort. She hadn't shifted since she was 16. 12 years. No wolf. No scent signature. No flare of bond or pack pull. The others whispered she was cursed, but not in the way you feared, in the way you ignored. They didn't banish her. They didn't hurt her. They just moved her to the edge of the village, a small, leaning cabin once used to store herbs and broken tools. That's where she stayed. Quiet, useful, unseen. She tended sprains and coughs. She ground the roots into powder. She memorized which leaves soothed burns and which slowed bleeding. But no one touched her unless they had to, and no one called her by name unless it was for work. Sometimes children asked questions. Why doesn't she shift? Why does she wear gloves even in summer? Why does she never come to feast nights? The adults hushed them. She's different. Leave it be. But they all knew what they called her behind closed doors. Cursed. Elira never argued. She didn't defend herself. She just folded her blanket tighter each night and tried not to think about the fire. Because that's when it had happened. One moment her world had been warm, her mother's voice humming, the hearth crackling, the scent of sweetroot in the air. Then a scream. Smoke. Heat that took the breath from her lungs. Her wolf had screamed once, high and broken, and then gone. Not dead, just silent. She hadn't heard it since, until the summons came. It arrived in the middle of the night, a royal rider on a pale horse, waking half the village with his horn before dropping a sealed letter into the elder's hand and galloping off without a word. The elder hadn't wanted to touch it. Not with her name on it. Elira had stood in the doorway of her cabin, half wrapped in her shawl, when they read it aloud. By royal decree she was summoned to the capital, to the Alpha King's palace, for bond evaluation. Laughter had broken out first, nervous, biting. That must be a mistake. She doesn't even have a wolf. But the seal was unbroken. The wax bore the crest of Frostspire, a snow-capped mountain under a crescent moon. No one faked that. The elder had cleared his throat. Elira, do you know anyone at court? She shook her head. Then maybe this is a test for loyalty or obedience. It wasn't. 2 days later, she left. No escort, just her herb satchel, a thin cloak, and the letter folded in her sleeve. She walked for 3 days. Ate nothing the first. On the second, a travelling merchant shared a strip of jerky and a few dried apples. He didn't ask questions. On the third, the palace gates came into view, silver and sharp and so tall they blocked out half the sky. The guards at the front didn't even look at her face. Name? Elira. They hesitated, then checked a list. Their eyes darted up to her once, then back down. East Wing. Lower chambers, Healer's Hall. No one offered to take her satchel. No one walked her in. She followed a quiet path of lanterns until stone swallowed the sky and the gates shut behind her. The palace was colder than the road. She thought of turning back, but the gates had locked behind her, and the summons had said clearly, refusal is not an option. At the chamber door, An old stable hand was spreading straw across the walkway. He looked up at her with sun-wrinkled eyes. "You, the cursed one?" She hesitated, then nodded. He grunted, leaning on his broom. "They only summon the ones the bond calls. Doesn't matter what folks call you." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The room they gave her had no windows. A narrow bed, a water basin, a single shelf nailed crookedly into the wall. Still, it was clean. She unpacked her herbs slowly, placing each bundle with care. As if that made her real, as if the smell of dried mint and nightflower could convince her she belonged here. No one came to greet her, no voice down the hall, no knock, just the steady silence of stone pressing in. By the time she lay down, her eyes were too tired to close. She didn't remember falling asleep, but she remembered waking. It wasn't a dream. Not in the way dreams feel soft and slippery when you try to hold them. This was clear, solid, a whisper, low, rough, but calm. It didn't come from outside, not from the hallway, not even from her thoughts. It came from somewhere deeper, from the place that had been locked shut for 12 years. One word, Kaelin. She sat up fast, heart pounding, her breath fogged the air. The room was colder than it should have been. She touched her neck, then her chest. Nothing was burning, nothing glowing, but her hands were shaking. She whispered the name back, just to hear how it sounded. Kaelin. The word made her stomach twist, not from fear, not even recognition, but longing, as if a part of her already knew the shape of that name. She rose from the bed, crossed to the door and pressed her palm to the cold wood. Nothing stirred, but something had shifted. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning she was summoned to the upper courtyard. A voice had barked through the slot in her door. "Bond evaluations begin at second bell. Don't be late." She dressed carefully. Plain as always. Her grey linen tunic, her soft boots, a scarf pulled tight over her head. The others were already waiting by the time she arrived. 6 women, all in silks and leather. They looked at her like she'd tracked mud in with her steps. One of them laughed. "The healer girl? They brought her." Another muttered, "She's probably here to tend the real contenders." Elira didn't speak. She took the last spot in the line. A hush fell as the guards opened the inner gate. He stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, black coat dusted in frost. His hair was dark, trimmed at the jaw, and his eyes, sharp, unreadable, scanning each face without pause, until he saw her. He stopped, just for a moment. A blink. His brows drew together, not in anger, no surprise, confusion. Then he looked away. The gate closed behind him. The women whispered again, but Elira couldn't hear them, because her bond mark, the one no one believed existed, pulsed once beneath her scarf. Hot, fast, then gone. She stood still. Her fingers brushed her collarbone, and though nothing showed, she knew something had happened. That night she didn't unpack anything else. She sat on the bed, back against the wall, and watched the candle burn low. When it flickered out, she closed her eyes. And once again, from somewhere deep inside her came that same whisper. Kaelin. This time her wolf stirred, and didn't go silent. Chapter 2. The Ones Who Were Chosen. The palace was beautiful, but it didn't feel alive. The walls gleamed like polished bone, the floors were too clean, and even the air smelled faintly of cold metal. Elira's new chamber was carved deep into the lower wing, beneath the healer's quarters. It wasn't a cell, but it wasn't a home either. The door didn't lock, yet it always seemed to close a little too heavily behind her. She learned quickly that she wasn't the only one summoned. By the end of the week, 7 other women had arrived, each carrying the same sealed parchment, each wearing the same guarded look when they first entered the hall. They came from different packs, high-born daughters, seasoned fighters, and one even from the mountain tribes to the north. Every one of them had a wolf that answered when called, except her. The first morning they were gathered in the inner courtyard. White marble tiles, a circle of old stones at the centre, and a silver banner fluttering from the archway. A steward explained that each woman had been called for the bond evaluation, a tradition that hadn't been held in over a decade, since the old lunar had died without naming a successor. It sounded ceremonial, but Elira knew better. The king needed to find his match. The council demanded proof of the sacred bond. She didn't know why she'd been included. She wasn't noble. She wasn't powerful. Her wolf hadn't spoken in 12 years. Maybe they needed a contrast, someone at the bottom to make the others shine brighter. That made sense. That's what people used her for back home too. The first few days passed quietly. Each morning, they were taken to the outer fields to run drills, study old rites, and learn how to mask their scent before royal audiences. Elira kept her head down. She moved when told, stayed out of the way, and answered only when necessary. The others seemed to forget she was there. Until Mira arrived. The first thing anyone noticed about Mira was her confidence. She walked like she already belonged there, tall, proud, her braid catching the sunlight like spun copper. When she shifted, it was effortless. Her wolf was sleek and silver, her howl sharp enough to make the guards pause mid-step. Even the healers nodded approval. Mira came from a long line of warriors. Her father had served the king's council before the last war. Her mother had been lunar to the Western clan before she died. She wore that legacy like armour. When the introductions were done, Mira turned to Elira with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you are?" "Elira." The pause that followed was long enough for everyone to feel it. "Oh," Mira said lightly, "the one they call cursed." A few of the others glanced down, pretending not to hear. Elira stayed quiet. She'd heard worse. Mira's smile tightened. "You must be here for the healers, then." "No," Elira said softly. "The letter had my name, same as yours." Something flickered in Mira's eyes. Surprise, then dismissal. "Well, every circle needs balance, I suppose, even if that means carrying a little dead weight." Elira didn't answer. She didn't have to. The others were already nodding in agreement. From that day on, Mira led the group. When they were summoned for practice or prayer, Mira took the centre. When Kaelin appeared to observe, Mira made sure she was the first to greet him. And every time she did, she looked at Elira, not directly, but through the edge of her smile, as if to remind her where she stood. Kaelin rarely spoke during the sessions. He would stand at the top of the courtyard steps, arms crossed, eyes moving slowly from one woman to the next. He didn't show a preference, not even when Mira tried to catch his gaze. Elira tried not to look at him at all. She focused on the small things, the way the light fell through the arch, the sound of the fountain, the pulse in her wrist when she thought too much. She didn't belong here. She just had to survive until they dismissed her. But on the fourth day, something changed. They were told to enter, the circle one by one, to stand before the king and let the bond stones test their wolves. The stones were old, relics from the first packs. When touched by a bonded wolf, they glowed faintly. When touched by one without a match, they stayed dull. Mira went first. The stones flared bright silver. The others clapped softly, smiling. She stepped back with a proud tilt of her chin. Elira's turn came last. Her stomach knotted. She could feel the stares on her back. Even the guards stopped shifting their weight. She walked forward, slow, careful not to stumble. Her hands were cold. She knelt before the stones. They were smooth and faintly warm, like something sleeping under the surface. She pressed her palms against them. Nothing happened. No light, no hum. Just silence. A whisper ran through the courtyard. Someone coughed. Mira's voice cut through softly. "Well?" At least she tried. Elira stood up. She didn't look at anyone. She turned to step away. Then Kaelin spoke for the first time. "Wait." The courtyard stilled. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried easily. She turned, heart racing. Caelan descended the steps slowly. His boots made almost no sound on the marble. When he reached her, he stopped a few feet away. His gaze held hers, searching. "What is your name?" "Elira." He frowned slightly. "From the frost fields?" She nodded. He studied her a moment longer, then looked at the stones. "Again," she hesitated. "Your Majesty, the stones." "Again," he repeated, quieter this time. She obeyed. Her hands trembled as she reached out once more. The stones stayed dim. But, for the briefest second, a blink, no more, one of them flickered, a faint gold pulse under her fingertips, then gone. The others gasped. Caelan's brows drew together, not in anger, not in disappointment, in confusion. "That's enough," Elder Thane said sharply from the gallery above. "A trick of the light. She's unbonded." Caelan didn't respond. He kept his eyes on Elira for another long moment before turning away. "Continue," he said, but his voice was quieter now, distracted. Elira stepped back, her legs unsteady. She returned to her place at the edge of the group. Mira smirked, whispering something she couldn't hear. The rest of the evaluations passed in a blur. By the time they were dismissed, the sky had turned pale. The others filed out, laughing softly about the day. Elira lingered near the back, pretending to check her satchel. When she finally turned toward the corridor, she saw him again. Caelan stood at the far end, half in shadow, speaking to one of the guards. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze flicked toward her once, brief, unreadable, before he walked away. Her pulse jumped. She didn't understand it. He was a king. She was nothing. Yet when his eyes met hers, something inside her shifted, like the world tilted just enough to make her dizzy. Back in her chamber, she sat by the small window slit and tried to reason it out. Maybe the stones had reacted to her touch by accident. Maybe the king's gaze had only lingered because of curiosity. A cursed woman standing where she didn't belong. Logic, not fate. But when she closed her eyes, she could still feel it. A faint tug under her ribs, not pain, not warmth. Something between the two. A pull. She pressed a hand to her chest. Her heartbeat felt strange, like it was syncing with something far away. She took a slow breath, trying to calm herself. "You're tired?" she whispered to the empty room. "That's all." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. That night, the palace slept under a soft blue haze. The moonlight slipped through the corridors, painting everything in silver. Elira lay awake, eyes open, watching the glow crawl across the ceiling. Then it happened again. The pull. Stronger this time, like an invisible thread winding tight between her ribs and somewhere beyond the stone walls. She sat up. Her throat was dry, her hands trembled. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Not real." But it was. She could feel it, not just in her chest, but in her wolf. The same part of her that had been quiet since the fire suddenly stirred, stretching weakly like it remembered how to move. For a moment she heard a heartbeat that wasn't her own. She pressed a palm over her mark. It was warm, almost burning. She stood pacing the small room. Her knees felt weak. Every logical part of her said to ignore it, to wait until morning, to act normal. But the pull didn't stop. It was gentle, insistent, like someone whispering her name just beyond hearing. She crossed to the door and cracked it open. The corridor was empty. Faint torchlight flickered across the floor. She stepped out, barefoot, moving slowly. The sound led her upward, through narrow stairs, past empty halls. She didn't know where she was going, only that her feet seemed to know the way. When she reached the upper balcony, the air changed. Colder, cleaner. She could see the courtyard below, bathed in moonlight, and at its centre a lone figure stood. Caelan. He wasn't wearing his crown or cloak, just a simple shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms. His breath fogged in the cold as he looked out toward the distant woods. She froze at the sight. She hadn't meant to follow him. but the pull inside her eased the moment she saw him, as if the thread had slackened now that she was close. She pressed a hand to the railing, steadying herself. Caelan turned slightly. His eyes found hers almost instantly, as though he'd sensed her before he'd seen her. Neither spoke. The air between them felt heavy. Not hostile, not strange, just aware. He took a slow breath. "You shouldn't be out here." "I couldn't sleep," she said quietly. He nodded once. "The stones today." He stopped, searching for the right words. "They don't make mistakes." "I didn't do anything," she said quickly. "It was nothing." "Maybe," he murmured, "but maybe not." He turned away, back to the courtyard. For a moment she thought he would say more, but he didn't. He just stood there, the moonlight catching in his hair, his shoulders tense like he was carrying too many thoughts. Elira watched him for a moment longer, her heart still racing. Then she turned and walked back toward the stairs. The pull inside her had quieted, replaced by something else, not peace, but the kind of unease that lingers when you've seen a glimpse of something you don't understand. Back in her chamber, she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her hands. The faint tremor in them wouldn't stop. She whispered to the empty room, "Why me?" The silence didn't answer. But deep inside, where her wolf slept, something shifted again, faint but certain. A whisper. Not in words this time, but in feeling, recognition. And for the first time in 12 years, Elira didn't feel completely alone. Chapter 3. The Wolf That Wouldn't Speak. The night of the first test, the moon was nearly full, pale and high, casting long shadows across the inner courtyard. A circle of torches lined the stones, flickering against the walls, warm where the night air was not. Elira stood at the edge with the others, the same 7 women, all dressed in ceremonial greys. Each was summoned to prove herself. She hadn't touched food all day, not because she'd forgotten, but because her stomach refused to settle. The courtyard was too quiet. Even the guards spoke in whispers. The scent of burning cedar drifted in the air, meant to calm the nerves, but it only made her dizzier. A steward stepped forward, reading from a scroll. "By decree of the Frostspire Council, and under the authority of the Alpha King, each candidate shall complete 3 rites of bonding: the shift under moon, the creed of allegiance, and the channeling of the mark." No one spoke. "Elira!" the steward called. Her name echoed louder than it should have. She stepped forward, heart pounding. The steward turned toward her, voice firm. "Shift." The others had done it easily. Mira had shifted in less than 5 seconds, graceful and effortless. Her silver wolf had circled the ring with practiced pride before melting back into human form without so much as a wince. Elira took a deep breath. She tried. She reached inward, where her wolf used to be, that place behind her ribs where instinct and fury and warmth once lived. But all she felt was static, silence. She pushed harder. Still nothing. She opened her eyes slowly. The steward didn't need to say anything. The others had already begun whispering. She didn't even try. "She's just standing there." Mira laughed softly. "Should we fetch the healers?" Maybe she fainted with her eyes open. Elira stepped back without speaking. Her fingers shook. Her face burned not from embarrassment but shame. She knew this would happen. She should have refused the summons, should have stayed where silence was expected of her. The steward called the next name. The test moved on. The torches flickered. Elira stood quietly at the edge, trying not to cry. When the circle emptied again, the steward returned. Next rite, the creed. Each woman stepped forward and recited the sacred lines. They'd been taught them since childhood. The pack is strength, the bond is truth, the alpha leads, the lunar anchors. Familiar words. Words that meant nothing to Elira anymore. When it was her turn, she opened her mouth. But her throat closed. The words stuck. They didn't rise. Not out of fear, but because they felt wrong. like she'd be lying if she said them. She didn't belong here. She never had. She couldn't stand beside these women and pretend she was like them. The steward frowned. "Speak." She shook her head once. "I can't." Mira's voice again. "Can't or won't." Elira turned away. Her silence answered for her. Elder Thane stepped from the shadows then, the only elder who had chosen to watch. He was tall, sharp, and always looked like he smelled something sour. His voice cut clean through the air. "She's wasting time. Remove her." Kaelin, who had stood silently behind the torchline all night, finally moved. "No." Thane looked at him. "She has no wolf, no voice, no place in this rite." "She's been summoned," Kaelin said simply. "She stays." The words were calm, but they sent a ripple through the gathered crowd. Thane's jaw clenched. "You summon a shadow and wonder why nothing grows. You would do better to pluck the rot before it spreads." Kaelin didn't respond. He looked at Elira, not kindly, not cruelly, just looking. Elira didn't know what to do with that. When the tests ended, the courtyard emptied. No one spoke to her. Mira walked past with a little smirk, her arm looped around one of the highborn girls. The others laughed. Elira kept her head down. Back in her chamber, she packed. She moved quietly, folded her clothes, rolled her herbs, tied them tight with twine. She placed everything in her satchel with the precision of someone who'd already imagined this moment 100 times. She wasn't angry, just tired. She didn't blame Kaelin. He hadn't made her a fool. She'd done that herself by thinking she could be anything more than tolerated. She glanced once at the mirror in the corner, the one she'd avoided since she arrived. The face that looked back was pale. Not fragile, but frayed. Tired eyes. Tension in her mouth she hadn't noticed until now. She slung the satchel over her shoulder. When her hand touched the chamber door, it happened. A sharp, searing heat flared beneath her collarbone, so sudden and violent she gasped. She stumbled back, her fingers clutching at her chest. It burned. Not fire, but something deep and alive, like gold melting under her skin. She yanked her tunic aside and looked. The mark. It had never been there before. Not since the fire. But now it glowed faintly, a golden crescent wrapped in a thin ring, pulsing under the surface of her skin. It blinked once, then vanished. She dropped to her knees, breath ragged. The satchel slipped from her shoulder, landing softly beside her. For a moment, the pain dulled, replaced by something stranger. Movement. Not in her limbs, but inside, like something turning slowly after a long sleep. A breath that wasn't hers, a presence. Her wolf, faint, weak, but stirring. It didn't speak in words, but Elira could feel it. A low hum of emotion, like a forgotten song remembered at the edge of sleep. Recognition, confusion, pain. And then something else. Wanting. She pressed her hand to the mark again, her fingers trembling. "Are you there?" Nothing. Then, warmth. A flicker. A pulse. A feeling. She wasn't alone. 12 years of silence, 12 years of cold, and now, this tiny moment, this small, impossible flicker. She let herself cry. Just a little. Not out of sorrow, but relief. Chapter 4. The Bond Mark. The note came just after dawn. A quiet knock, a folded square of parchment slipped under her door. No crest, no seal, just her name. Come to the grove. No guards, no one else. Elira stared at it for a long time. She read it 3 times, fingers brushing over the paper like it might disappear. The grove. Not the courtyard. Not the training fields. Not even the Hall of Rites. The old grove behind the palace was reserved for private matters. Oaths, farewells, grave sites, sometimes even punishments. It was sacred in a way that didn't need explanation. She didn't ask permission. She didn't dress differently. She didn't tell anyone. She pulled on her boots, wrapped her shawl once around her shoulders, and stepped into the corridor before her heart could talk her out of it. The guards stationed at the southern hall didn't stop her. If they noticed where she was going, they said nothing. The grove was quiet. The trees grew in uneven lines, their roots thick and twisted, forcing the stone paths to crack and bend around them. A small arch marked the entrance. 2 half-pillars crumbled from age and moss. Beyond them the world softened. She saw him before he saw her. Kaelin stood near the centre, one hand resting on the bark of an old white tree. No crown, no cloak, just a simple black tunic and worn boots. He looked younger here, less guarded. She almost turned around. Almost. Then he looked up. His eyes didn't widen in surprise. He didn't straighten. He simply nodded once, like he'd known exactly when she'd arrive. "Elira," he said quietly. She stepped under the arch. "You asked for me." "I did." A long pause followed. Not heavy, just unsure. She waited. Kaelin let go of the tree and walked slowly toward her. The earth crunched faintly beneath his steps, pine needles, bits of frost. When he was a few feet away, he stopped again. "I felt something the night you arrived," he said. "I've tried to make sense of it." Elira lowered her gaze. "I don't know what it was," he continued, "but it hasn't left me, and I think you feel it too." She said nothing, not because she was being stubborn, but because she didn't trust her voice. Every time she looked at him lately, something in her shifted. The ache in her chest that had once felt hollow now hummed, soft, but present. Kaelin's gaze dropped to her shoulder, where her tunic covered the place the mark had flared. "May I?" he asked gently. Elira hesitated. Her breath caught. He didn't press. Finally, slowly, she nodded. She reached for the edge of her collar and pulled it down, just enough to reveal the skin beneath. The mark wasn't visible. Not yet. But her skin still remembered the burn. Kaelin stepped closer. He raised a hand, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. When his fingers touched her shoulder, everything changed. Heat, deep and instant, surged beneath her skin. Her mark flared golden and bright, pulsing like it had a heartbeat of its own. Light bled through the fabric like sunlight through water. Kaelin staggered back, his hand dropping. Then, his mark lit too, right over his heart, through his tunic, bright gold alive, matching hers. Elira gasped, taking a step back. The glow held for a full breath, then faded. They both stood in stunned silence. Kaelin looked down at his chest, then back at her. "Did you feel that?" he asked, voice hoarse. She nodded. "I don't—" He shook his head once. "That doesn't happen unless—" His words trailed off. They both knew what it meant. Bond recognition. But it wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not in secret. Not without the elders. Not with someone like her. Elira pressed a hand over her mark, still warm. "I didn't do anything." "I know." "I didn't mean for—" "I know," he repeated more firmly this time. She looked up at him. "What does this mean?" He didn't answer. Not right away. His eyes searched hers like he was trying to read something in her face that he hadn't seen before. "I don't know yet," he said finally, "but it's not nothing." Footsteps. Soft. Too soft for guards. Kaelin's eyes flicked toward the trees. Elira turned just in time to see a flash of movement, red fabric between the trunks. The hem of a formal dress, a figure retreating fast. "Mira." Her heart sank. Kaelin let out a low breath. Of course. They stood there for a moment longer, neither of them sure what came next. Elira finally spoke. "You should go." He looked at her, unsure. "If they saw," she added, "they'll say I planned this." His jaw tightened. "You didn't. But they'll say I did." He didn't argue, didn't deny it, because they both knew it was true. He nodded once. Before he turned to leave, he looked at her again. "Don't leave the palace." She frowned. "Why?" "Because if that mark is real," he paused, voice low, "they'll try to make you disappear before the bond seals." Then he was gone. Elira stood alone in the grove, heart pounding, the echo of warmth still lingering beneath her skin. Chapter 5. The Elder's Verdict. The palace was not quiet that morning. By mid-sun, the halls buzzed with murmurs too loud to be whispers and too cautious to be called declarations. The bond mark had flared twice, once on Elira's skin, once on Caelan's chest. That alone should have ended the matter. But it hadn't. It had made things worse. They called it an anomaly, a flicker, a trick of unstable magic. They said the cursed girl had manipulated the bondstone, or worse, the king himself. Elder Thane's voice echoed loudest through the halls. She's a danger, a lie, a cursed flame in sacred halls. He repeated it so often it stopped sounding like an opinion and started passing as law. By noon, Mira had rallied the others. The favoured daughters, the ones with pristine wolves and ancestral names, stood in the main courtyard draped in ceremonial silks. They didn't shout, they didn't storm, they petitioned. Protect the right, Mira said clearly, her voice cold and sure. Don't let impurity lead the pack. No one dared look Elira in the eye when they passed her in the corridor. Some muttered prayers under their breath. Some pulled their children closer. A few looked almost sorry, but not enough to stand near her. She stayed in her room, until the knock came. It was Caelan. She opened the door slowly. His cloak was dusted with frost. He hadn't shaved, and there was tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. The council's called a trial, he said. She didn't answer. They're invoking the sacred right. They want you to prove your wolf is real. Her breath caught. They can't do that, can they? They can, he said quietly. They want to force your shift. She took a small step back. Her hand touched the edge of the bed frame. What if I can't? Caelan didn't speak right away. His voice, when it came, was low. Then they'll void your bond claim. You'll be removed from the palace. No mark, no return. No return. It wasn't punishment. It was erasure. She nodded once, her hands curling into the fabric of her tunic. When? Dusk. Caelan turned to leave, then paused. Elira. She looked up. He stepped closer, his voice lower now. If it doesn't work, if your wolf doesn't come, don't think it changes what I saw, what I felt. She stared at him. I'm not letting them decide who you are. And then he was gone. Dusk fell fast. The sacred stones sat at the heart of the grove, older than the palace itself. No banners were hung, no horns were sounded. The trial wasn't meant to be ceremonial. It was meant to be final. Elira stood at the edge of the circle, barefoot. Her cloak had been taken, the cold bit at her skin. Her breath fogged in the air, but her heart thudded warm. Caelan stood just outside the line, flanked by two guards. Mira stood across from him, arms folded, face tight with triumph she didn't bother hiding. Elder Thane stepped into the circle with the authority of someone who'd already written the ending. Elira of the Frost Fields, he said, his voice ringing out. You stand before the ancestral stones, under challenge. By the law of the first bond, you must now prove your claim. She didn't speak. Shift, Thane said, or step down. The stones beneath her feet were smooth and cold. She tried not to tremble. She closed her eyes. She reached inward again. Not toward the mark, but deeper. Where her wolf once lived. That space had been quiet for so long it had started to feel dead. But something had stirred recently. Something warm. She searched. Memories came first. The fire, the scream, the silence that followed. Her mother's face half lost in smoke. Her wolf's a flicker in the darkness, gone without a goodbye. But something else came next. The grove, Caelan's voice. May I? His hand on her shoulder, the light, the pull. She dug deeper. Nothing at first. Then, warmth, small, flickering. She pressed toward it. Stillness. More stillness. Then a whisper. Not a sound, a feeling, a presence. I never left you. Her knees buckled. Gasps rose from the crowd. Kaelin stepped forward, but a guard held him back. The earth beneath her feet trembled. Not hard, not violent, but real. The stones shifted faintly. The air thickened. A hum began, soft, like music from below the surface of the world. She gasped as heat surged through her chest. Her mark flared. Golden light poured from her collarbone, spreading in thin threads up her neck, down her arms. Her hands glowed. The earth rumbled again. She looked down at her fingers. Her skin shimmered, the edges of her form blurring, bending. Something inside her moved. She heard her wolf again. Clear this time. I'm here. Elira closed her eyes and stepped forward. Chapter 6. The shift that broke the silence. The world narrowed to breath, to heartbeat, to the steady, burning rhythm of something coming undone inside her. The glow beneath Elira's skin grew stronger, spreading outward like water breaking through cracks. Her fingers flexed involuntarily. Her spine curved forward, every nerve awake, every muscle trembling. The sound around her dimmed, the crowd, the murmurs, the shifting of boots on stone, all of it fell away. Only the pulse of the bond remained, pounding deep in her chest. For 12 years she had forgotten what it felt like to be whole. Now that forgotten part of her demanded to return. The first change came through pain. Her bones strained beneath her skin. Her breath caught, her vision blurred, her mark blazed, gold bright enough to hurt her eyes. She wanted to scream but didn't. The pain was old, familiar. It reminded her of fire, of smoke, of the night she thought she'd lost everything. But beneath it, another sensation pushed through, warmth. A calm heartbeat, not her own. The sound of her wolf breathing with her again. Then, silence. And then, motion. She didn't howl. She didn't cry. She just shifted, slow, painful, whole. Light shimmered off her skin as her form bent forward, her palms hitting the cold earth, her back arching as fur began to replace flesh. The air filled with the soft sound of bones resetting, ribs expanding, sinew tightening. It wasn't violent, not like the stories told of feral transformations. It was steady, deliberate, controlled, like something sacred reclaiming what was lost. And then she was there, standing where Elira had once been, a silver-grey wolf with golden eyes. Not white like Lunar's bloodlines, not black like war-born alphas. Silver, rare, quiet, balanced between both. Gasps rippled through the grove. No one moved. The wolf stood still for a moment, testing her own legs, tail twitching slightly as she lifted her head toward the sky. Her breath misted in the cold, but her body glowed faintly in the torchlight. Her eyes, those bright amber gold eyes, found Kaelin first. He was already watching her. The expression on his face wasn't shock. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Recognition. Like a man seeing a memory made real. He took one careful step forward. The pack, council, guards, attendants, watched him, confused by his calm. No one dared interrupt. Even Elder Thane, who stood with his jaw set like stone, didn't speak. Kaelin's hand twitched at his side, but he didn't reach out. He didn't command her. He simply lowered his head slightly, enough to show respect without diminishing his place. Easy, he said softly, not to restrain her, but to acknowledge her. The wolf's ears flicked forward. She tilted her head. Recognition sparked across the bond, faint but true. Her heartbeat synced with his again, and for one fleeting instant, the mark on his chest flickered beneath his tunic. Mira turned sharply. "This isn't possible," she hissed. "She's manipulating him." Kaelin didn't respond. He didn't even glance her way. The sacred stones beneath Elira's paws began to glow, not the harsh gold of bond marks, but a soft, living white. Each stone hummed faintly, like they remembered her, like they were waking up after a long silence. Elder Thane stepped forward finally, his voice strained. "It's an illusion." The cursed use tricks of spirit light to fool. Before he could finish, one of the stones split clean down the middle, not broken, opened, as if the earth itself had recognized her. The hum deepened. Elira's wolf lifted her head higher and with one measured exhale released a low sound. Not a growl, not a howl, something between the two. A sound that vibrated in every chest, that settled into the bones of everyone present. Recognition, acceptance, return. Even the wind went still. No one dared breathe. When the glow began to fade, Elira's wolf turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning the crowd. She stopped when she saw Mira. The other woman's face was twisted, pale with anger she couldn't hide. Her hands clenched so tightly her nails drew blood. When Elira's wolf held her gaze, Mira looked away first. Elder Thane muttered something under his breath, low and furious. His plans had been built on certainty, that Elira was nothing, that her silence was her shame, now that silence had turned against him. Kaelin stepped forward again, closing the distance to the edge of the circle. The wolf turned toward him, cautious but calm. The bond pulled tight, an invisible thread between them. He could feel it too. His hand brushed against his chest, where the mark burned faintly through the fabric. She took a single step closer. He didn't move. Her ears flicked once. Then, slowly, she lowered herself onto her front paws, bowing her head. Not submission, acknowledgement. And then she changed. The shift back was smoother, less pain, more flow, like her wolf wanted her human self to return. Fur shimmered to skin, limbs reshaping, light fading into stillness. The cold air bit against her bare shoulders, but she didn't flinch. When she lifted her head, she wasn't the same. Elira stood taller, shoulders back, eyes steady. The mark on her collarbone still glowed faintly, gold traced with silver veins, proof that the bond was alive, not legend, not mistake. No one spoke, not even the elders. Mira broke the silence first. "She's an abomination," she spat, the words shaking. "She doesn't deserve—" "Enough," Kaelin said. The tone wasn't loud, but it silenced everything. He stepped forward until he stood just inside the ring of sacred stones. He looked at Elira, not at her mark, not at the curve of her shoulders, but directly into her eyes. The space between them pulsed faintly, charged with the strange, familiar warmth that had haunted both of them since the night she arrived. Elira didn't lower her gaze. She didn't cover herself. The cold, the whispers, the eyes, none of it mattered now. For the first time in years, she wasn't hiding. Kaelin drew in a breath. His chest rose slowly, his expression unreadable. Then, before anyone could misinterpret his stillness, he bowed his head. It wasn't a deep bow, not the kind given to a lunar or a leader, but enough to be unmistakable. Respect. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Mira's mouth opened in outrage. Elder Thane's face went pale. Elira's breath caught, her throat tight. She didn't understand why he'd done it, not fully, but she felt what it meant. He wasn't bowing to her power. He was bowing to truth, to survive, to the bond that refused to be erased. When Kaelin lifted his head, his eyes were softer. "You've proven yourself." Elira didn't speak. Words would have broken the moment. She nodded once, small, steady, sure. Behind them the murmurs began again, but quieter now. Cautious. The kind of whispers born not of scorn but of awe. No one dared to challenge what they'd seen. The stones still glowed faintly at her feet, and though the wind had picked up again, it carried no chill. Mira turned away, fury shaking her shoulders. She spat on the ground near the circle, a final insult before storming off toward the hall. Elira didn't react. She didn't need to. The stones themselves seemed to hum in her defense. Elder Thane lingered longest. His eyes burned with calculation, his voice low. "You think this changes everything, girl? One shift doesn't erase a curse." Elira met his gaze without fear. "It wasn't a curse," she said quietly. It was silence. And now it's gone. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. When he finally turned to leave, Kaelan stayed where he was, still inside the circle. The torches flickered in the wind, reflecting off the faint glow of his mark beneath his shirt. He looked down at Elira once more, something unreadable in his eyes. Pride, maybe. Or understanding. Or both. Elira straightened her shoulders. The night air was cold against her skin, but she didn't feel small anymore. She didn't cover herself, didn't reach for the cloak someone offered from the edge of the grove. This was who she was, and she wasn't going to hide again. Kaelan took a half step forward, not close enough to touch, but enough for her to feel the warmth between them. Their eyes met. He bowed his head again, slower this time. Not in submission, in respect. Chapter 7. The Threat Beneath the Crown. The shift changed everything. For days the palace felt different. Every whisper stopped when Elira entered a room. Every eye followed her as if she'd turned into something that didn't belong in their world. Not cursed anymore, but dangerous. The kind of danger that made people drop their gaze and pretend not to stare. The bond mark had sealed itself faintly between her collarbone and shoulder, still golden when the light hit it. She tried to keep it covered, but the glow sometimes broke through the fabric like it refused to be hidden. It wasn't her power that frightened them. It was what it meant, that the bond had chosen outside the lines they'd drawn for generations. The council didn't speak of it openly, but the halls carried its echo. Mira had gone quiet since that night. She didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't even look at Elira anymore. Silence was worse. Mira had always been loud. Silence meant she was thinking, calculating. Elder Thane stopped calling her cursed. He called her the anomaly now. It sounded clinical, detached, but his eyes said otherwise. He whispered behind doors, in the old council chamber where Kaelan's voice couldn't reach. Kaelan still held the crown, but power in Frostspire had never rested solely on the throne. It rested in traditions older than the crown itself, the laws written by those who feared change more than death. And Elira was changed. She learned to move carefully through the palace. Not because she was scared, but because she understood what quiet envy could become. The first sign came 3 mornings after her trial. A wildflower, white and small as Sohor, left on her cot. No note, just the flower. The next day there was bread, fresh, still warm, placed neatly on a plate that wasn't hers. Then a note, unsigned. You don't belong among wolves of royal blood. It wasn't cruelly written. It was worse. Polite. Like someone smiling as they warned her to stay in her place. She didn't show Kaelan. Not then. He already had too much to balance. The elders pressed him for another evaluation. The council demanded Mira's reinstatement as acting heir of the bond line. And through it all, Kaelan said nothing that would reveal his decision. Elira kept her silence too. But she watched. The guards on her wing changed shifts more often. The servants began bringing her meals earlier, and when she left her room, the hall lights flickered like someone was testing the wires. Nothing outright hostile, just off. One afternoon, Kaelan found her in the training yard, practicing simple forms the palace warriors used for grounding before shifts. Her bare feet pressed into the cold stone, her breath even, her hair tied back. She hadn't noticed him until his shadow fell across her. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said. She looked over her shoulder. You sound like one of them. His mouth curved slightly. One of whom? The ones who watch me like I might explode. He stepped closer. You did shift in front of half the council, Elira. That would make anyone nervous. I didn't hurt anyone, she said quietly. I know. He studied her. But they don't see that. They see what they don't understand. She straightened. Then teach them to understand. Kaelan's jaw tightened. I've tried. They think the bond mark was a trick. Or worse, a rebellion. She wiped a strand of hair from her cheek. So they fear what they can't control. Yes. He paused. You could stay in the inner wing, near me. It's safer. She shook her head. I don't want to be chosen out of guilt. It's not guilt. Then pity? He hesitated. That was answer enough. She turned. Back to the training post and lifted her hands again. Let them whisper, Kaelin. I've lived with worse. He didn't argue. He just watched her for a moment longer. The quiet, steady rhythm of her breathing, the way her hands didn't tremble anymore. And then left without another word. That night she couldn't sleep. The moonlight slid across the floor in thin white lines, falling on the foot of her bed. Her wolf stirred faintly under her skin, restless, alert, the same way it had the night of the trial. Something's wrong, the wolf whispered. Elira sat up, listening. The palace was too quiet. Even the usual sounds, the drip from the fountain outside, the occasional creak of the old wood frames, were gone. Only the faint rustle of leaves from the grove beyond her window. She rose, slipped her cloak around her shoulders and stepped into the corridor. The air was colder than it should have been. A chill that didn't come from stone but from intention. She followed the feeling, down the staircase, past the old hall of vows, toward the grove. The moon hung low, silver against the black, the same grove where everything had begun. She walked slowly, her boots brushing through fallen leaves. The scent of cedar lingered, faintly mixed with something else. Bitter herbs, unfamiliar, and sharp. Her wolf stirred again. Not safe. Elira stopped near the centre beside the white tree where Kaelin had once stood. At first she thought she imagined it. A flicker at the edge of the shadows, the glint of metal. But then she heard the sound, the low click of a weapon being drawn. Her chest tightened. She didn't move. Who's there? She said quietly. No answer. The air shifted. Then something struck the ground beside her. A dart, small and silver-tipped. It hissed as it buried itself into the dirt, smoke curling up from where it landed. Poison. Elira backed away slowly, eyes scanning the tree line. She couldn't see anyone, but her wolf's senses caught movement. 3 heartbeats, closing in. The voice that followed was low, cold. You should have left when you had the chance. She didn't recognize it. Male, young, confident in the way only someone sent by another could be. Her pulse quickened. Who sent you? No reply. The figure moved again, closer this time. Elira's wolf bristled inside her. Not fear, instinct, the protective kind that wakes when threatened. Don't do this, she warned. You don't know what you're... The second dart came faster. She ducked. It skimmed her shoulder, cutting fabric but not skin. Smoke filled the air again, acrid and metallic. She coughed, eyes watering. Her wolf growled low beneath the surface. Then came the third dart, aimed directly at her throat. Something inside her snapped. The world sharpened. Her eyes shifted gold. The mark on her skin flared to life, bright enough to cut through the dark. Before she realized it, her body moved. The dart missed, caught mid-air as her hand closed around it. The metal burned against her palm, but she didn't let go. She threw it back. Hard. A muffled cry came from the shadows, the rustle of footsteps retreating, fast, the scent of blood, faint, but real. Elira's chest heaved. Her hand still burned from the contact, but she didn't care. The grove went silent again. She looked down at the dart embedded in the dirt, saw the faint green residue on the tip. Her wolf murmured, wolfsbane, strong. Someone had wanted her silenced, not scared, not wounded. Gone. She turned toward the palace, her heartbeat slowing as the adrenaline drained away. Kaelin would have heard the noise. The guards would find the tracks soon. She didn't want to be there when they did. They'd ask questions, and she didn't have answers yet. As she stepped out of the grove, something rustled behind her. Not an attack. A voice. Her wolf's voice. They thought you'd forget me again. Elira froze. The mark warmed beneath her collarbone. Not burning, glowing. But I don't go quiet anymore. Her throat tightened. She closed her eyes, letting the voice settle deep within her mind, calm, steady, alive. When she opened them again, the grove was still. The moon was rising higher, the trees bending softly in the breeze. Someone had tried to silence her wolf. And failed. Chapter 8. The Truth About the Fire. The attack changed everything. For 2 days, no one left the inner walls. The grove was sealed under Kaelin's order, and every guard posted there was questioned until their voices cracked. Elira's chamber was moved to the upper floor, closer to the throne wing, guarded on both sides. She hadn't asked for protection, but Kaelin didn't ask what she wanted. He just ordered it. When she protested, quietly, tiredly, he only said, "Someone tried to kill you. That's not something I overlook." He didn't call her cursed now, didn't call her anything at all, just you. The healers treated her shoulder where the dart had grazed. The cut was shallow, but the poison had left a faint mark, green-tinged and stubborn. They said it would fade. It didn't. Elira didn't mind. Scars told the truth, even when people didn't. The palace pretended to move on, but fear changed the rhythm of everything. Doors stayed locked longer. Meals were silent. Mira disappeared from public halls, claiming illness. Elder Thane met privately with the council twice a day. Kaelin, though, was everywhere, inspecting guard posts, walking the perimeter, pacing the court chamber with restless energy. Every time Elira saw him, he looked a little more hollow around the eyes. On the third night, he came to her room. He didn't knock. He entered quietly, his cloak damp from rain, his hair unkempt. The scent of cedar and cold air followed him in. "They sealed the grove," he said. "No one gets near. It now." Elira looked up from the small desk where she'd been sorting herbs. "Do you know who it was?" "Not yet." She waited for more. He didn't give it. "I can help," she said. "You already have." Her brows furrowed. "How?" He met her eyes. "By surviving." It wasn't comfort, but it was honest. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Rain tapped softly against the window. When he finally spoke again, his voice was lower. "They wanted to silence your wolf." Elira looked away. "Then they should have aimed better." That made him pause. He looked at her differently then. Not as someone to protect, but as someone dangerous enough to threaten what people like Thane built their power on. He nodded once, then left. That night, she dreamed of fire. It came without warning, red and hot and choking, the same dream she'd had for years, only sharper now, the smell of burning wood, the cry she'd never been able to answer, the feeling of being pulled by something unseen, away from the door, away from her mother's voice. She woke gasping, the sheets damp, the mark on her chest burning. Her wolf's voice was there before her eyes opened fully. "You're ready to remember." Elira pressed a hand against her collarbone. "Remember what?" "What really happened that night?" Her breath hitched. "I know what happened. There was a fire. No." The voice was patient, gentle. There was more. The room tilted around her as a sound filled her ears. The crackling of flames, the sound of someone breathing close to her face. She saw it, not in fragments, but whole. The night of the fire. The cottage door splintered. Her mother's scream. The scent of burnt oil. Not from accident, but from intention. Someone had poured it. A man's shadow moved through the smoke. "Elira, run," her mother's voice had shouted. But then another voice, deeper, steadier, too calm for the chaos around it, whispered behind her ear. "No, stay still. This isn't meant for you." She hadn't recognized it then, but now, as the memory sharpened, the tone, the rhythm, the calm authority, it all lined up. Thane. She saw him through the smoke. The glint of his ring, the same one he still wore now. The signet of the Elders' Council. He'd bent down, pressed a hand to her shoulder, and drawn something on her skin with ash and blood. the same crescent that became her curse mark. Her wolf's voice came again, steady. He silenced me that night. Not to save you, but to hide you. Why? Because of what you were meant to become. Her chest felt tight. A lunar? Not just that. The lunar who rises without lineage, the one who ends the blood rule, the prophecy. The elders had whispered of it for years, a fable about a bond chosen by fate, not family. They used it as a threat, not a promise. A lunar with no bloodline brings ruin, they'd say. She'd heard it as a child and never thought of it again. But Thane had. He hadn't feared ruin. He'd feared losing control. The memory hit her in waves now. He dragged her outside the burning cottage, his hand pressed against her temple before the world went black. He'd marked her as cursed, to silence the wolf that could prove her bloodline didn't matter. Elira sat there until her breathing steadied. The rain outside had stopped. She rose, pulled on her cloak and left her room. The palace halls were dim. Guards nodded but didn't stop her. Her feet carried her toward the one place she knew Kaelan would be, the council chamber. He was there, standing by the window, papers spread across the table. His hand gripped the edge hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. When he saw her, his eyes softened. "You shouldn't be—" It was Thane, his jaw set. "What?" Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. "The night of the fire. He was there. He marked me himself." Kaelan stepped closer. "You're certain?" I remember his voice, his ring. He said it wasn't meant for me. Kaelan's expression hardened. And the mark. He used it to bind my wolf. To make everyone think I was cursed. He stared at her for a long time, then turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" "To end this." He didn't let her follow. The next hour blurred into noise. Raised voices from the throne hall, the sharp sound of Kaelan's tone as he demanded the council assemble immediately. Elira stayed just beyond the door listening. "Elder Thane," Kaelan's voice rang out, steady and controlled, "I accuse you of violating sacred law, of binding a child's wolf to conceal prophecy." Thane laughed, dry and humorless. Accusations built on dreams and whispers. "I saw the mark myself," Kaelan said. "I felt the bond respond to her. You knew what she was." "She's an anomaly, not a prophecy," Thane snapped. "And you, boy, are too blind to see how she's unraveling everything our kind built." "She's not unraveling anything," Kaelan said, stepping forward. "You are." The council murmured, shock, disbelief, fear. Elira pressed closer to the door, her pulse racing. She could picture it, Thane's eyes narrowing, his ring catching the light, the way power shifted in the room like a storm forming. "You think a girl born from no line can rewrite centuries of law?" Thane hissed. "You'd throw away the order that's kept this kingdom alive?" Kaelan didn't hesitate. "If the order demands chains, it deserves to burn." Silence followed. When Thane spoke again, his voice was low. "Then you'll regret choosing her." A chair scraped against stone. Guards moved. Kaelan's voice dropped, quieter but firm. "Take him to the lower hall. He faces trial at dawn." The door opened. Suddenly, Kaelan stood there, his expression unreadable, his eyes searching hers. "You were right," Elira swallowed. "What happens now?" "The council is divided," he said. "Half will want him exiled. The others will want to silence you before sunrise." "So, nothing's changed," she said quietly. He stepped closer. "Everything's changed. Now the truth has a name." She didn't realize she was shaking until his hand brushed her shoulder. Not to steady her, just to remind her she wasn't alone. "What will you do?" she asked. Kaelan's gaze met hers. "The council's calling an open dais tomorrow. They'll demand you speak, or leave." "Leave? It's the only way they'll call it even. You can walk away now. Stay safe beyond the borders. I'll make sure no one touches you." Elira's throat ached. "And if I stay?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The dais wasn't about truth. It was about control. For a long moment, neither moved. The torches burned low and the air smelled faintly of rain. When she finally spoke, her voice didn't shake. "I'm not running again." "Elira?" "No," she said, firmer now. "He silenced my wolf once. I won't let them do it again." He looked at her. Not as his subject, not as a threat, but as an equal. Then, quietly, he nodded. "I'll stand beside you." By the time dawn began to pale the windows, word had already spread. The cursed girl would face the dais. The prophecy would be spoken. The kingdom would witness it. And Elira, wrapped in her cloak, stepped toward the courtyard where it would all unfold. She didn't know what the outcome would be, only that she'd made her choice. She would stand. Chapter 9. The Dais of Witness. The dais was quiet that morning. No music, no banners, no crown, just the pack. The wind moved softly through the sacred grove, carrying the scent of pine and ash. The same grove that had once held her trial, now waiting for something far older than judgment. The stones had been scrubbed clean through the night. The elders stood in a half circle. Guards lined the perimeter. No one spoke. Elira walked barefoot across the cold ground, her cloak trailing lightly behind her. The morning dew touched her feet, grounding her with every step. Her bond mark was visible, uncovered, glowing faintly where skin met light. She could feel their eyes, hundreds of them watching, some with fear, some with doubts, some, a few, with quiet pride. Kaelin stood beside her, not ahead, not above, beside. He wore no armor, no symbols of rank, just the simple tunic of the first alphas, a sign that the dais belonged not to the crown, but to truth. The elders waited. Thane stood among them, wrists bound loosely, his expression unreadable. The council hadn't exiled him yet, not until the prophecy was confirmed or denied. He lifted his chin when Elira approached. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was low, controlled, but the tremor beneath it betrayed him. Elira stopped at the center of the stones. "You said that once before." He blinked. "The night of the fire," she said. "You told me to stay still, that it wasn't meant for me." Thane's jaw tightened. "You remember nothing. You were a child." "I remember enough," she said softly. "You marked me that night. Not to protect me, to hide me. You bound my wolf because you were afraid." Thane's lips curled into a thin smile. "Afraid? I preserved the order. The bond should never cross bloodlines. You would have undone everything." Kaelin's voice cut through the air, quiet but firm. "The law you wrote was not the law of the moon. You twisted it to hold power, not balance." Thane ignored him, eyes locked on Elira. "Do you think one act of shifting makes you lunar? You're nothing. A flicker of power mistaken for prophecy." The murmurs rose. The pack whispered. The council shifted uneasily. Kaelin didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His silence was its own declaration. Elira took a slow breath and stepped forward onto the center stone. The circle glowed faintly under her feet, not with heat but with memory. The place remembered her now, her fear, her silence, and the moment she broke it. When she spoke, her voice wasn't loud, but every word carried. "I was never cursed," she said. "I was silenced. The night of the fire, Thane marked me, to stop my wolf, to stop a prophecy that said a lunar would rise, without lineage, and change the laws of the packs." The elders shifted, whispering to one another, alarmed. Elira continued. "He feared what it meant, that our strength isn't just born, it's chosen, that a bond can come from spirit, not blood." Thane's face twisted. "You speak heresy." "No," Elira said, meeting his eyes. "I speak truth." The wind stilled. Her hand moved to her mark. The gold beneath her skin flared softly. "This mark isn't a curse. It's the bond answering its call." She looked to Kaelin. "You felt it too." He didn't deny it. "I did." A hum spread through the air, quiet at first, then stronger. The stones pulsed faintly beneath their feet. a rhythm older than language. Thane's composure faltered. Enough of this spectacle. You think a trick of the light makes her chosen? He turned toward the council. I invoke the challenge. The bond cannot be proven by words. The elders froze. Invoking the challenge meant blood. It meant the accused must either yield or prove themselves before the pack. No one expected it. Not after everything. Kaelin didn't move. Elira stepped forward. Then I accept. Gasps spread through the gathering. Thane's eyes darkened. You don't know what you're agreeing to. Yes, she said calmly. I do. The dais stirred with energy. The sacred stones responded to the vow, glowing brighter now, white and gold mixing like sunrise. Kaelin's hand twitched at his side. Elira. I have to, she whispered. If I run, they'll say he was right. He clenched his jaw but nodded once. Then I'll stand with you. Thane stepped into the circle, breaking the boundary that separated the accused from the challenger. The crowd drew back. His hands shook faintly as the light touched his skin. You want truth? He hissed. Let the stones decide. He reached toward her mark, intent on breaking the glow, the same way he had once silenced it. But the moment his hand came close, her wolf surged awake. A sound tore through the air, low and deep. A howl, not just hers, but hers, and something greater. It wasn't rage, it wasn't defiance, it was the voice of every bond denied before her. Thane stumbled back. The light from her mark flared, gold spilling outward until it touched the stones. Each one lit up one after another like a chain of recognition. The pack gasped. Some fell to their knees. Kaelin's mark ignited in response, golden light shining through his chest, brighter than any torch. His breath caught, his body rigid, his eyes locked on hers. The bond responded. The flare between them wasn't fire, it was acknowledgement. The sacred stones blazed in unison. The hum became a roar of energy, and through it all, Elira stood calm. Thane screamed something, words lost in the sound. He lunged forward, his hand reaching for her again, but before he could touch her, another hand stopped him. Mira. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable, but her grip was strong. Enough, she said. Thane stared at her in disbelief. You? You were meant to… She shook her head. I was meant to serve the bond, not your lies. Thane tried to pull away, but she held firm. Guards moved forward, grabbing his arms as he shouted, his voice drowned out by the sound that followed. Elira's wolf howled again. The sound rose through the air, echoed by the pack. One by one, heads lifted, voices joined, not for the king, not for the council, but for the truth. The bond sealed before their eyes, a thread of light connecting Kaelin's chest to Elira's mark. It burned for a moment, then settled into a soft, steady glow. When the sound faded, the grove fell silent again. Kaelin stood at her side, his chest still glowing faintly. He didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. Around them the pack stared in quiet awe. The old world had ended without anyone declaring it. Elira's breath shook, not from fear, from release. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was on trial. She was standing in truth. The pack began to howl again, louder this time, hundreds of voices blending into one, not for the king, but for the one who rose from ash. Chapter 10. The justice that belonged to her. There was no crown, no feast, no song. Thus, morning after the dais, Frostspire was silent, not with fear, but with the kind of quiet that follows truth, the kind that doesn't need to be shouted. The sacred grove still glowed faintly from the night before, a thin veil of golden mist hanging above the stones. The air smelled of cedar and ash, and the trees bent slightly toward the clearing as if listening. Elira stood there, the hem of her dress brushing against the damp grass. Her hair was unbound, her shoulders bare. She wasn't trembling, she wasn't hiding. Kaelin stood beside her, not as her king, as her equal. Their hands were clasped, not in ceremony but in something simpler. Steady, present, human. The elders had already left. The council had been dismissed. The people had scattered, leaving only them and the echo of the howls that had filled the night. No one called her cursed anymore. No one dared. Thane had been exiled before dawn. Kaelin didn't drag him through the streets or hold a public trial. He'd walked him to the border himself, silent the entire way. When the gates opened, Thane didn't look back. His name was erased from the ledgers that lined the Hall of Memory. His seat at the council table stood empty, a reminder not of disgrace but of what power built on fear truly cost. The laws that followed came slowly, written not in ink but in choice. Kaelin dissolved the Bloodline Act, the decree that made heritage a measure of worth. He replaced it with the Oath of Origin, binding all wolves, whether royal, rogue or healer, under the same vow, to protect the voice within. The mark of a curse no longer meant exile, it meant potential. Mira left quietly. No tears, no outbursts. Just a note slipped beneath Elira's door that morning. You were right. I was afraid of losing what I thought was mine. But you never took anything from me. You gave it back to all of us. Her scent vanished from the palace soon after. No one followed her. Elira didn't stay in the royal wing. She could have. Kaelin offered her rooms, guards, even a place beside the throne. But she didn't want marble walls or a ceremony. She asked for something else. The old healer's cottage. The same one she'd been sent to after the fire, when the village called her cursed and she'd lived on the edge of belonging. It was still standing, barely. The roof sagged, the door leaned to one side, and weeds had claimed the garden. Kaelin sent builders to restore it. Elira refused. It doesn't need new walls, she told him, just open doors. He smiled faintly. Then at least let me send supplies. Only if you promise not to send guards with them. He didn't argue. He rarely did anymore. So she went back. The first night she slept on the same cot she had as a girl, listening to the wind move through the cracked shutters. It didn't sound like loneliness this time. It sounded like peace. By the second week, others came. A young boy with a half-faded mark on his wrist, told by his pack he'd never shift. A girl with amber eyes that changed colours when she lied. A quiet man who heard whispers when the moon rose but thought himself mad. Elira opened the door to each of them. She taught them what no one had taught her, to listen, not for words but for the sound beneath them, the heartbeat of the wolf, the truth that fear had buried. She didn't heal them. She helped them hear themselves again. When she wasn't teaching, she rebuilt the herb beds. The scent of sage and rosemary soon replaced the damp of the ruined wood. She walked the grove daily, her wolf pacing beside her in quiet contentment. Sometimes Kaelin visited, never announced, never as king. He'd arrive at dusk, his horse left at the edge of the forest, a basket of supplies in one hand, exhaustion in his eyes. He never stayed long, just enough to share silence, to breathe the same air that wasn't thick with council politics. Once, as he watched her help the children mix herbal paste for their marks, he asked softly, "Do you ever miss it?" "What?" she said. "The palace, the power, the attention." She smiled. "That was never mine to miss." He nodded, watching her a moment longer. "And this?" "This," she said quietly, "was always meant for me." He didn't press further. When he left that night, she stood at the door watching him disappear into the trees. Her mark glowed faintly through her sleeve, calm, not burning. Seasons passed. The palace changed, slowly, but visibly. The new grove grew where the old dais once stood. Kaelin had ordered it planted in her name, not as a monument, but as a living vow. Each tree represented a truth restored, each stone a law rewritten. The stones bore no crowns, no carvings of kings, only her name. Illyra of the Healer's Grove. It wasn't a title or worship, it was gratitude. And sometimes when the young ones from her cottage walked there, they'd stop and press their hands to the stones. Not for blessing, but to remember what courage sounded like when it spoke quietly. Years later, on a night when the moon was full and soft rain dripped from the branches, Illyra sat by the window of the cottage, watching the glow of the palace in the distance. Her hair had silvered slightly. Her eyes still carried the same calm gold. A small girl, one of her students, sat at her feet, sorting dried petals into neat piles. "Teacher," the girl said suddenly, "what does cursed mean?" Illyra looked down, surprised by how simple the question sounded. The girl waited, her hands paused above the herbs. Illyra smiled, small, gentle, certain. "It meant," she said slowly, "that they were afraid of what I would become." The girl frowned. "Afraid of you?" "Of what truth looks like when it doesn't ask for permission," Illyra said softly. "Sometimes people call what they fear a curse, but fear fades. Truth doesn't." The child nodded, satisfied, and went back to her sorting. Illyra leaned back, her eyes drawn again to the grove beyond the hills. Somewhere in the distance she heard a faint howl. Familiar, steady, strong. Kaelin. He never called her to the palace anymore, but on nights like this, when the moon hung full, he'd call to her. Not with words, but through bond. A greeting, a promise. Her mark warmed in response. She rose, stepping outside. The night air was cool, the grass damp under her feet. She didn't shift. She didn't need to. She lifted her head, looked toward the horizon, and breathed deep. The pack's howls carried on the wind. Not mourning, not demand. Celebration. The same voice that once had been silenced now joined them. Illyra's lips curved faintly. She closed her eyes, let her chest fill with the sound of the living world, and then she answered. Not as a queen, not as a cursed child, but as herself. Her howl rose through the air, strong and clear, weaving into the others until it became one sound, not of victory, of belonging, and the grove, her grove, echoed back.